So how did you get involved with Weev's whole story against battling the government?
Well, I mean, basically, when I got involved with it, I knew almost nothing about it. I was reviewing books for this website called Pop Matters, and they would send me books to review, and he was written about in one by a journalist for Forbes. And this was like late 2012. And so I was looking around for a film to do because I was supposed to have gone to Afghanistan with an army unit and be embedded there and do a documentary on their kind of combat stuff. But they got reassigned and the army media people nixed the project.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw this, I read about him in this book, heard about internet trolling. At the time I knew nothing about it. And he sounded like a fascinating character. The author of the book, Parmy Olson, made him sound like a total badass and, you know, hilarious and all these other things. So I was like, this sounds really interesting. I started to look him up on Twitter, realized he was in the midst of this, like, you know, giant prosecution by the feds. And, you know, I just hit him up and asked him if he wanted to do some initial interviews and see if there was a film here. And he said, get a hold of me after the initial trial, and if we'll see if I'm found guilty or not guilty. And so I got a hold of him afterwards. He had been found guilty, and he said, "Okay, let's do it." So that's how it went down.
I gotcha. Did the outcome of his trials and his appeals affect your outlook on our government and our judicial process?
I mean, it did, but not from the, I think there's two camps of, like, you know, the government can do no wrong or the government's totally evil. You know, mm-hmm. Those are like the two polar opposite views. And I mean, I think what happened to Weev is that he upset the wrong people and was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The DOJ and the FBI at that time were just anybody who had anything to do with computer crimes, they were coming down as hard as they possibly could on. And they did not expect him to fight, you know. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that they offered him several different plea deals. He had a co-conspirator in the case, a co-defendant. That guy pled guilty and testified against Weev. Mm-hmm. You know, but for whatever reason, his personality, you know, his ethics at the time or whatever, I mean, he stood up against them and said, you know, throw the book at me, I dare you. And they did. But, so I don't, in terms of, you know, how I feel about the government, it's just one of those things where I think, you know, you have this thing that's out there, that's supposed to protect people from, you know, drug dealers and murderers and, you know, people committing actual real crimes. And it looked at Weev and didn't know that he wasn't a criminal, you know, it had no way to distinguish. I mean, I went to New Jersey and had a couple meetings with the DOJ attorneys that were prosecuting him, trying to get him to be a part of the film. Mm-hmm. And this was before the sentencing, and they had, you know, several discussions with me, and they were all really good people. They reminded me of friends of mine who went into law school and, you know, became attorneys and stuff. They were all really smart. I think their heart was in the right place, but they could not see that this guy, you know, was not a criminal. You know what I mean? In their minds, he broke the law and he needed to be punished for it.
Interestingly enough, I mean, he didn't really break the law.
Well, yeah, he broke the letter of the law, you could say, and he didn't even do it. It was his co-conspirator. But the problem is, the second you enter into a conspiracy, you're guilty of everything that the person who did it is guilty of. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the film was definitely an education in the law, you know, and how you really don't want to get caught up in the legal system if you can avoid it.
Yeah.
Because it will destroy your life, and it will, you know, basically drain all of your savings, and, you know, it's going to follow you around for the rest of your life. So if you can avoid it, don't get involved with it.
And knowing Weev's personality, there's no way that he wouldn't stand up for himself. That's, from what I understand, what I read, and from the documentary, there's no way that he would back down, even if what he did was legally wrong. There's just there would have been no way he wouldn't have put up a fight.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's just embedded in his personality, and that took an education for me to get used to, because that's such a rare thing, I think, in human personality, at least nowadays. I mean, just that ability to stand by yourself and stand for a principle. Even though the dude does a lot of heinous shit, and of course he's become a different person nowadays after this whole thing, but at the time it was hard not to respect that aspect of him, because the other guy in the trial did exactly what you're supposed to do. He rolled over and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, just don't throw the book at me, and I'll plead guilty." That's exactly what you're supposed to do, and he refused to do it.
Had two large corporations not been involved with this, do you think it would have gone to the lengths it did go through?
Well, from my understanding, they didn't have much to do with it. Like, Apple actually had almost nothing to do with it in terms of pushing this, and AT&T really didn't either. I mean, they were instrumental in bringing evidence forth for the FBI and the DOJ in this whole thing.
But they even admitted that he had done nothing wrong.
Right. So, but I mean, they didn't push it. You know what I mean? The motivation really came from the FBI initially, and then the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey. And I think the FBI had really been following. The arrest warrant said they'd been following him around since he was like 14 or 15 years old. Mm-hmm. And he was part of groups back in the day of like some pretty hardcore computer hackers. I can get you the names of the guys. You would recognize them immediately. I mean, it was guys that like spent 15, 20 years in prison for like, stealing credit cards and hacking various huge bank internet sites and stuff back in the 90s. And he was like in the chat groups with these guys. So I'm sure the FBI had a dossier on him for a long time. And then, with all the Freedom of Information Act documents I got, a lot of the background they had on him were just like news articles about like, meet the guy who hacked into Amazon, or meet the guy who did this, or, they had the New York Times article about him and all his ability to like destroy people's lives and get all their information and everything. Like that was part of their dossier on him. So they obviously read all these things and said, "Oh, we need to keep an eye out for this guy." So that was the motivation, though. The FBI really kind of was the driving force in this whole thing.
It seems like most of their motivation also came from misrepresentation from the media as well.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. That I didn't really make it in the film except just tangentially in terms of like people just putting those pieces together for themselves. Like I didn't explicitly make that point, but I mean absolutely. Like he was a larger than life character when you read these articles, like that New York Times article by Matthias Schwartz. Like you read that thing and you're like, this guy sounds like a super hacker, brilliant super hacker, like comedian. I mean, he's just larger than life. You know what I mean? And so his reputation certainly preceded it.
Would have things have been a little bit easier all around if his personality hadn't been as strong? Do you think he would have been less of a target?
Well, I mean, without his personality, he's not. There's a lot of guys that do the same thing he does in terms of trolling, and there's a lot of guys who are as technically proficient computer programmer dudes, But it's that force of personality that is kind of his magic, the magic ingredient for this whole thing. So, yeah, absolutely. No, his personality is his defining trait. Everything else are traits that other people have. But they don't have that personality.
What was the most taxing thing about making this documentary?
Well, I mean, it was not having a massive budget. I mean, you probably know that, documentaries are not exactly like the highest funded films, Yeah. So it was Well, I mean, there were two aspects of this. There was just the production itself. I mean, I had to spend, hell, I think I eventually got to like thousands of hours of editing. The film was 6 hours at one point. And I wanted to tell like every story. So I wanted to tell like the computer security story. I wanted to tell like, and Weev and this whole, group of hackers and trolls, they all come from, the history of the internet and the history of computer security and programming are all intertwined with his story. So you can't really take that out because he's just a very extreme version of what like the computer programming ethic is, which is like total self-sufficiency, freedom of speech. I can say whatever I want and you're the one who's reacting to it, so it's your responsibility how you feel about it,
Mm-hmm.
Like I asked a bunch of people in the film that were all programmers about, well, how do you feel about him, harassing people or saying all these mean, terrible things to people? And this was before all the racial stuff that he's doing now.
Yeah.
This was just back when it was, I guess could be considered like a pure form of trolling or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But even at that time, he was accused of, harassing people and destroying people's lives, quote unquote, and all this kind of stuff. And their response to me asking that question was, they're the ones who are reacting to it. If he tells you you're a bad person, if he calls you a name or says you're a bad person, that's on you, how you respond to that. And that's like a very kind of like computer programmer engineering perspective on life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that seems very indicative. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go for it. Sorry. No, go for it.
It seems very indicative of what our social media culture is like now. That no matter what you say, if you say something that is very truthful or you just state the facts and someone doesn't like it, then they can become so enraged that it can actually affect the person that simply spoke the truth, which is more or less what happened to Weev. He just pointed out that there is a giant flaw, and unfortunately all that weight came down on his head. But it seems like outrage culture just affects it all across the board. No matter what you do, the truth is always hurtful to somebody. Yeah.
Well, and it's a double-edged sword. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I tend to agree with the computer programmer ethic of like, people do need to like toughen up a little bit rhetorically and kind of distance themselves. Like if somebody is typing mean things to you on the internet and you take that personally, to me that's a problem. Like you need to like take a step back and decide why these people's anonymous tweetings at you are like hurting you. Like is your self-image so broken that you can't handle somebody criticizing you once in a while? Why can't you laugh it off and move on?
Yeah.
And I hope
like when people say
that this is like a toughening up process. Like trolling is like a way of is becoming more and more mainstream in general. Like people are acting more and more like trolls online, just normal everyday folks. So maybe that kind of toughening up process is actually occurring. But I mean, I totally agree with you. Like, people and their special beliefs or attitudes, when those things are challenged, they just freak out and they can't deal with it. So
I'd like to see more journalists take that stance of not particularly trolling, but when you see blatant hypocrisy or flat out lies in the media, that you will sacrifice maybe your job to simply say, no, here are the facts. But being an entertainment journalist,
or at least say,
I don't have a foot
I don't know the facts. Yeah, or at least say, I don't know the facts. Here's my interpretation. Like everything you're reading right now is my opinion.
That's what makes it so hard to do any research anymore. Because if I go on to CNN or NBC News, and I'm just like, this is all conjecture. Where are your citations? God damn it! Where is anything that I can back up? Because
I totally agree. It's it needs to be. I mean, we'll just see what happens. But I think that's with media in general. I don't know. It's just too bad that there's no market pressure on these outlets. that's kind of what this whole thing is missing. It's like, for some reason, there's no market pressure on these people to change. You know what I mean? It's like there's an audience for it, and I think that's kind of part of the point of the film, is that if there's a market for all this like outrage culture and, you know, gotcha journalism and outrage journalism, then it's always going to be there. That's a big point of the film in terms of trolling and media's complicity in it. Like, the media is always going to report on these fake hacking trolling stories because they need it. They need the traffic, you know?
It'll always pull in people that are easily scared of something they don't understand. That's what I took away after I watched the documentary. It's, you can spin this in such a way that you place certain words that aren't exactly false but not exactly truthful, and then you can make it seem like what's happening is this attack against people or against government officials or whatever. I mean, even my email was part of that exposure, because I was an early adopter of the iPad, and I thought, okay, someone has my email. So what?
Right.
Everyone on my contact list.
That was your reaction.
Yeah.
That's awesome, dude. Because that would have been my reaction too. You know, I would have been like, okay, you know. So they saw my email address. Who gives a shit? And Michael Bloomberg said the same thing. Even I don't know, some intrepid journalist tracked him down because he was, you know, one of the parts of the leak. You probably saw that part, you know?
Yep.
And they wrote some like article about him saying like he didn't really care. I mean,
it's an email. It's not credit card information. It's not your address. It's an email. It's the most easy thing for someone to get anywhere.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And, you know, so it was a trip, dude. It was a trip making the film. I got inserted into this culture that I knew nothing about. I was on the periphery of, kind of as a kid, because I was on BBSs and had, you know, friends who phone freaked and stuff, but I didn't have, this was like a new experience in terms of just meeting all these people. I mean, I met like Richard Stallman and hung out with him for a few hours in San Francisco, and, you know, a couple other guys like that, like the fathers of the internet type people. And, you know, I just realized that Weev is like a very extreme version of all these people's personality, you know, just absolute kind of black and white. You know, I don't want to say autistic, but it's like borderline on that, where it's like very obsessive about language and, you know, right versus wrong and what's acceptable and all that kind of stuff. You know, there's not a lot of gray area.
Yeah, he's like the personification of absolutism. It's just it's either the facts or it's not facts. That's it.
Yeah. There's no like subtlety or a gray area. Which is, I'm not saying it's a better way to, I'm not saying having subtlety and gray area is a better way to think. I mean, maybe it's not, you know. But it was interesting to be a part of that world for a while, and you know, kind of get the inside view of it. And it's the culture that is totally shaping where we are going and everything. So that's the other aspect of this whole thing, is like all these people make all the products we use every day, you know. And computer programmers in that whole world, I mean, are definitely shaping our culture more than anybody else nowadays, you know. So for better or for worse, some of it's shittier and some of it's better, you know.
Yeah, and I think after watching Zuckerberg get grilled by people that aren't exactly tech savvy, we missed out on a chance to really sort of see what happens with our data. Unfortunately, it was just a misguided just circus.
Yeah.
But I'm
well,
hoping.
Yeah, I mean, and that's. Go for it, sorry.
I'm hoping as alternative news media starts to grow on YouTube and other sites, that we get more journalists that are willing to put themselves out there at the risk of backlash to try to find this information without having to answer to a corporation, which is kind of happening, but not at the speed that I hope it would. But I think we'll eventually get there, and news media will eventually have to conform to the fact that you need to have journalistic integrity in order to survive when more people are going to YouTube to get their news than they are going to CNN.com or even the BBC at this point.
Right.
When conjecture overrules fact-based reporting, I think we'll get there. It's just going to take forever.
Yeah. Well, I think the missing part of the whole thing, which I mean, it has nothing to do with this film, but I mean, it's also realizing that those massive media outlets are like basically arms of the U.S. government or world, basically, you know, any world government that can afford, you know, really good PR people and all that sort of stuff. Like, you know, half the reporters on CNN, their spouses work for like the DNC. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's like there's so much like overlap of politics and big media that you know, if somebody in the government wants to get a message out, they just get to do it. It's like another arm. It's like these big media companies have become an arm of the U.S. government, essentially. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think
like the bureaucratic state. You know?
Yeah, I think when Outfox came out years ago, and it showed the bullet points that the Bush White House would directly send to Fox, showing you will talk about this, and this. Like, why would you ever conform to that? Right. How could you ever just flush your integrity down the toilet and say, yes, we will cover this and nothing that makes this current administration look bad?
Yeah.
Maybe the Trump presidency will fuck that all up.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like the Trump presidency is a troll, man. I mean, I truly believe that. I mean, in terms of like its effects, you know, it's helping people see how this whole thing actually works, because it's kind of flipped it upside down. It's made it so extreme that you get to see everybody's kind of shown their true colors. You know what I mean?
It's been very eye-opening, even though I'm like the second form. I'm like almost the lowest tier of journalism, right above like paparazzis. But still, being an entertainment journalist, I try to have some integrity with what I report. So just watching this, like, wow, how can I be a better journalist than these people that are paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this? It's just it's insane to me, and also sort of depressing, but. Like, there's, God damn, that sucks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but yellow journalism was always a thing, you know what I mean? Like back in the day. And I think we've transitioned out of that for a period, and we're kind of going back to it where, you know, when like Charles Lindbergh flew around the world, half the news reporters were reporting like he died halfway through, and like, you know, his mom was like trying to get up in an airplane to go find him, you know? They just invented shit. Like, full on, just made it up. You know what I mean?
But
and
nowadays...
back in what, the early 30s? So, I mean, that's kind of like the same thing. We're kind of slowly moving back towards that, where it's just pure, who can I get to read this? How can I sell a paper? How can I get another click? You know? And usually within less than 24 hours, you have pretty big YouTube channels that'll come right out with either a rebuke or a total debunk of this information. Like, I don't know if you saw the whole bully hunters thing that happened last week, where they were trying to stop online trolling. Was that the video game thing? Yeah. I only saw a couple tweets about it, but I think I got the big picture. A couple corporations coming together to make money off of online harassment. It was a terrible thing, and it was so flawed on just an academic level of taking statistics that don't really exist and saying that 3 million people are affected by this, but you can't back up the numbers. Right. And it went south so badly that everyone involved disavowed it within 48 hours. I think that's, if that power of the internet could be used towards everything else, we'd have a better world, journalistically speaking. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. That was like the promise of the internet in its early days, was this kind of democratization, for lack of a better word. I hate that fucking word, but it was like a way for communities to form outside of these like massive corporate enforced communities, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It was a way for us to have like real community, I think is like on a large scale. I don't know if that promise is still there. I really hope it is. But I mean, if, the way YouTube is going with like all its censorship and like these platforms are going with information, kind of like censorship,
mm-hmm.
Like if you post a link somebody doesn't like, I guess you could get a notice that's like, oh, this could be fake news. It's like, I mean, yeah, it could be, but obviously people are not so stupid. Like that's an initiation you have to go through on the internet, is to figure out what's fake and what's real.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just part of living on the internet, and it should not be like some corporate enforced thing. If there's the cool thing about the internet was everything was just there, and it was your choice whether to view it or not. And it makes you a smarter person to go through a few times and like realize, oh, that was a hoax news story that I like tweeted out to everybody. Now I feel like a fucking idiot. I should probably look at this a couple times before I do that again. You know what I mean?
There's no learning anymore. Luckily, we have companies like Google that are willing to censor it for us, so we don't have to make those mistakes.
Right, exactly. But I mean, that's why I'm concerned that the promise of the internet is going to be eroded without that kind of just like blatant, unfiltered, freedom of information. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Just because people aren't going to be allowed to make those mistakes and learn lessons and do all that stuff, And sometimes there's shit that is, offensive, and I don't want to watch it, so I don't watch it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it shouldn't be there, but,
Yeah, if a company is willing to put any sort of political ideology ahead of freedom of speech or freedom of information, it concerns me more of what is actually going on with their employees. How are their employees being treated more so than if they're censoring someone? Like, are they also filtering their employees, saying that, oh, you don't fit this profile of what we want, or what our quote unquote
corporate manifesto is, or whatever.
Yeah. We're kind of seeing that now with what's happening with Google. I'm interested to see what that lawsuit brings, but it's egregious enough to censor someone's work on YouTube, but then even more so, how are you treating your employees that is allowing this sort of thing to happen? How scared are they to speak out, or how full have you packed yourself full of people that only think one way? I feel that's even more dangerous, because you're creating a workplace that is inherently toxic and is eventually going to spill out to other companies in Silicon Valley, if it hasn't already.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's that whole thing of also when you get a bunch of people that think exactly the same way, they start to like feed into each other's ideologies, basically. Mm-hmm. And you're going to have, I guarantee in the next 5 years, you're going to have scandals where like these companies, it's revealed that these companies are like, the employees are like reading everybody's email and like scanning for keywords to find like the people they don't like. I mean, I'm sure they're already doing that. You know what I mean? I mean, if you're a sysadmin, the secret of like, the sysadmin at everybody's, corporate office, like the IT guy, he can go in and read all your emails. And I'm sure he does half the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've
and the hotel IT guy, is watching what everybody's all the videos everybody's watching in every room. I mean, it's like these are the secrets of like the IT sysadmin staff people. You know what I mean? They can access all of your information, and I guarantee that whoever's running Gmail and all the people that have access to it are searching for keywords and reading these emails, and eventually they're just going to start leaking this shit.
Yeah.
And then there'll be a massive scandal.
That always worries me about using Wi-Fi when I'm traveling, because I have to sign NDAs almost every week for CBS or for Netflix or for whoever is having me out, and just one of those things gets out and someone can just here's 20 behind the scenes photos of whatever, say Stranger Things season 3, and my NDA is attached to it as a PDF that's in a packet. Then oh fuck, I've got 10 lawsuits coming down right on me, just because I was stupid enough not to think about how my data is going back and forth between my email server and my phone. That's the thing that really worries me when it comes to that, not someone publishing a fucking list of emails.
Right. No, totally, man. And the law of numbers protects us from that, obviously, because it's like, what are the chances of that happening? Mm-hmm. It's pretty fucking small, but it's happening every day to somebody.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't have had the whole fappening thing if there wasn't a glaring problem that was easily exploitable. I mean, all these celebrities would not have had their private images just out there for everybody.
That was a great story, dude. There was a lot of Schadenfreude involved in that whole thing, because I was just like, oh, so these uber wealthy, quote unquote quote privileged people that should be all their problems should be solved and they should never have any issues. They're like sending nude pics to like dudes they barely know. Like this is incredible. You know what I mean?
I had a cute meet with a guy at Starbucks, and now I'm sending him my entire Flickr account full of all my naked photos from 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's just like, damn, dude. This is like the People magazine section where it's like celebrities are just like you. I was like, oh my god, dude, this is a perfect future for that.
What would be your next project to do a documentary on, if you want to go through that kind of thing again?
I mean, I definitely want to. It's a totally rewarding process, because it's like putting all this time into something and actually having a completed thing at the end of it that you were responsible for. It's very gratifying. Mm-hmm. Even if people don't like it, it's like you can look at something and go, I did this. It took a huge part of my life, but it was totally worth it. So I definitely want to do that again. I think the one I really want to do is basically on what's called the petrodollar, and I'm starting to put all the pieces together for this, because there's a bunch of hedge fund traders who have written books about this, but it's kind of like an underground story that doesn't get reported on in the press much. But basically the U.S. is the global reserve currency, and the reason it is because of a deal that the Nixon administration made with the Saudis right after Nixon closed the gold window I think it was like 72. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of a fascinating story about Russia, because Putin is basically taking huge advantage of the fact that they are right next to China and Europe, and neither China or Europe have their own oil reserves.
Right.
And so, Russia supplies like 80% of the natural gas to Europe, and they're building a bunch of pipelines into China. So basically what's going to happen is the U.S. is no longer going to be the global reserve currency for oil any longer, because the U.S. used to also be the biggest importer of oil, and now we're exporting oil every year. So it's like this massive chessboard that is, all these pieces are being moved around on behind the scenes, and no one's reporting on it. The U.S. government isn't talking about it because, obviously they don't want to. And there's going to be a lot happening with it in the next 5 years. So I want to make a film on it before all of this becomes information everybody's talking about around their kitchen table some night, So that's
within the next few years, a lot of different superpowers are going to be making some very strategic moves, is what I'm understanding from that then.
Yeah, exactly. The Chinese just opened the first ever oil contract that could be traded in yuan, which is unheard of, that a country would open a contract in its own currency. They're always in U.S. dollars.
Right.
And it's been very heavily traded. So this is the first shot across the bow of the U.S. being the world reserve currency. And the reason that is a problem is once the U.S. is no longer the world reserve currency, we're not going to be able to have a deficit like we have. Because the only reason we can have that massive deficit is because everybody constantly has to buy our bonds. The U.S. The U.S. is continually printing money, and everybody has to come in and buy it to be able to go buy oil. Mm-hmm. And so once that no longer happens, we're not going to be able to carry that massive deficit that you see. So
that can be very, very bad for us.
Yeah, and so I wanted to put that all in a film and explain it before anybody else explains it. So.
Yeah, when China decides to say, hey, you know all that money you owe us?
Yeah,
we need
well,
that back, and by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that's less of a danger, honestly, than them stopping buying it. And they've started to slow their purchase of U.S. reserve currencies. So that's when it's going to be a problem, when they stop buying it. Not that they ask for their money back, but when they stop buying it. So that's my next film, my friend. I'm going to tell that story and hopefully blow some minds. You know, we'll see.
For the people that want to find the Troll Inc. documentary, where can they find that now?
It's going to be in mid-May. It's going to be on Amazon and iTunes and basically all the streaming platforms. Mm-hmm. So they can go to trollinkmovie.com. We check that URL. Actually, let me just check it really quick. And I just want to make sure because Troll Inc. was not available, unfortunately, so I'm always forgetting what the actual URL is. Yeah, trollinkmovie.com. They can go there and there'll be a link to the streaming sites, or they could go to the Facebook page too. Just search Troll Inc. on Facebook and it comes right up.
Is there any behind the scenes or unused footage that people can see anywhere?
I will post some eventually, but currently no. But I mean, it would be a shame for these interviews not to get out because I literally have like, somewhere close to like 60 hours of interviews. Some of them with some really amazing people that never go on camera. Mm-hmm. So I have like Dan Kaminsky, like the dude who basically hacked HTTP and fixed it. I mean, like these are legendary people in the computer hacking world. So I'm hoping to basically eventually put all those online. I just have to figure out legally how I can do that. You know, I think I have permission based on what these people signed when they became part of the film, but I have to just make sure everything's cool with that before I go and just post this stuff.
Gotcha. Okay. Awesome. Thank you very much, George. I appreciate you taking the time this sort of afternoon, midday to sit down with us to talk about.
I appreciate you writing on it. Yeah, I appreciate you writing on it. If you have any further questions, shoot me an email or call me back, and I'm happy to answer anything or make any clarifications.
Okay, will do. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy your weekend, and I can't wait to see what else you got for us in the future if the government lets you get this next documentary out.
Yeah, totally, man. We'll see what happens.
Thank you very much.
Cool.
Thank you. Bye.
All right.